I think we are seeing some pretty big shifts. I mean, for a Chinese senior police official to be down in the Thai-Myanmar border area, actually walking across the border and going in to assess the scam centers is something that's unprecedented. China has had, I think some involvement last year in repatriating some of its nationals that got tied up in the scam centers. But this high level of action is something that is, I think, quite new. I think also around this, it's become very clear the extent to which the activity that's happening in the area has just gotten to a point where it's completely out of control. I mean, the scam economy has grown to really become the mainstay of the economy in the whole Thai-Myanmar borderland. These mafia figures have gotten more and more powerful, more and more bold in terms of the different types of criminal activity, the extent to which they're, targeting new types of demographics with human trafficking. Things have really gotten out of control to the point where this is having very direct impacts for Thailand's national security. It's having impacts on the Thai economy. It's having impacts on, the reputation of the country. And I think it's similar for China, where you see that these Chinese crime groups have really taken over territory. They've become deeply embedded within the Myanmar military's border guard force. And they're now able to target Chinese nationals with trafficking, with scams in ways that, you haven't really seen them do in the past. And so I think in particular here, it was the trafficking of Wangxing, which involved a very new form of human trafficking, a very customized approach. In the past, the approach was much more, you would see posts for high-paying jobs circulated online. This was a very targeted approach that involved someone with many years of experience in the film industry going out there and targeting through his own personal network a large number of Chinese professionals who were then subsequently trafficked into Myawaddy. But it also came at a very sensitive time for the Chinese police and courts because just days before the news about Wang Xing getting trafficked came out, the Chinese courts announced that they were starting to hear the proceedings of the case related to the Kokong Border Guard Force criminal actors. So this was the members of the Ming clan, including Ming Guoping and others who were involved in even the murder of Chinese nationals in October of 2023. The Chinese courts just announced that they were starting to hear that case on December 30th of last year. And CCTV, the Chinese TV station, official media station, had actually also put out a documentary showing how the Chinese police had achieved victory over the scam syndicates, highlighting that Chinese police, through cooperation with Myanmar, had annihilated these criminal actors. Well, that documentary came out, and then just a couple days later, it became very, very clear that no, these syndicates have not been annihilated. And in fact, they're as powerful as ever and engaged in all forms of new and even more malign crimes. And so I think this triggered a very strong response on the part of Thailand, on the part of China. And you're starting to see now that there's a massive amount of pressure that is coming on to those who are involved, those who are responsible for this. And the main responsibility goes to the Myanmar Military Border Guard Force, the Korean Border Guard Force, who was the one that brought all of these transnational criminal actors into the Myawaddy area going back to 2017. It seems like there is very significant political will at this point to address the issue. I mean, if you compare with what happened in 2024, there was the announcement also of, cuts to electricity, cuts to internet, That was followed through a little bit, but just weeks later, you saw that the criminal groups had once again brought in new sources of electricity, new sources of internet. You saw where they increased the number of actual telecommunications towers on the Myanmar side. The Mytel towers started to come in more. But basically, those moves last year were undermined by the border guard force and by the scam syndicates, by the mafia groups. You also saw where there was a lot of, I'd almost say, criminal whitewashing that was undertaken by the border guard force last year. It put up signs claiming that it would move all of the online businesses out. And in fact, you saw rather than pushing them out, they brought more in, with even the border guard force leader himself, Chithu, actually holding a prayer service in August of last year to pray for the return of a criminal kingpin to Yatai HG, to the Shwekoko area. So rather than pushing out criminals, you saw where the border guard force was actually asking for divine intervention to bring more criminals into the area. So you saw where there was really no real intent on the part of the border guard force to address these issues. And why would it? That's the mainstay of the economy and the main source of revenue to the border guard force. I think this time it's much more serious, particularly around the added security and the very direct mobilization that you're seeing of more resources coming in from Bangkok. I think one thing, to consider is that from 2017, when these crime groups started to come into the area until present, on the Myanmar side of the border, you've seen where the border guard force, the Chinese mafia groups have brought in massive amounts of security. They've built up their arms. They've recruited many new military and paramilitary personnel into the area. They've set up security around all of the compounds, and they've really taken over the area. Whereas on the Thai side of the border, things more or less were static. So there weren't really adequate resources in place to ensure the security of that border, meaning that the criminal actors and the border guard force and the other militia groups providing protection to those scam syndicates were able to take advantage of Thailand, to prey on Thailand in many different ways. And this created harm for many countries around the world. I think, kind of this recent push that we're seeing does demonstrate that there's a much higher level of political will. And of course, you're also seeing where there's a lot more action being taken also by other international actors around these issues as well. There's more attention, not only the Chinese police officials running around down there, but also, Thailand is starting to call for the diplomatic community to come in to provide assistance to people from dozens of different countries who've all been trafficked into the areas around Irrawaddy and Three Pagodas and some of the other adjacent areas. So it looks like it is a much more comprehensive move to crack down on this. You mentioned also arrest warrants. I think that that's also a pretty bold move on the part of the Thai police. And it actually gives Thailand a very significant amount of leverage over the border guard force. I think at this present moment, why you're suddenly starting to see all of these individuals released from the compounds relates very much to that push for arrest warrants, because you see where now what the border guard force leaders are trying to do is to avoid those arrest warrants from being executed. Because if those arrest warrants move forward, I think you'll have a situation that parallels very much what happened with the Kokong border guard force, which was involved in the exact same forms of crimes that the Karen border guard force was involved in. But those arrest warrants that were issued targeting 10 of those border guard force elites back in late 2023 more or less led to the collapse of the scam empire on the Kokong in the Kokong territory. And while four of those Kokong border guard force leaders are still at large, and seemingly still involved in online scamming, it did push that activity out of Kokong, which is now under the MMDAA's control. So the arrest warrants could end up being quite significant in terms of the ability to push for a much bolder form of crackdown, a much more systematic crackdown in this case. I mean, why should we believe him up until this point? You know, it was already stated, I think, very clearly on those public billboards last year that this problem was supposed to have been dealt with by October 31st of 2024, and that simply didn't happen. I think then also, you know, does Chithu really want to hand over all of the criminal kingpins? Does he really want to eradicate all of the scam centers that he's played a role in building up since the end of, I mean, all of this started in December of 2016. That's when the first of these criminal kingpins came into the Myanmar Thai borderland at the invitation of the Myanmar military's border guard force under Chithu. That's when all of this started. And then you saw where many other very dangerous organized crime groups, largely from China, came one after another into those areas, setting up shop, building out these massive scam centers. This is his basically economy as the border guard force has built it. They've built one massive illicit economy. What happens if that is fully eradicated? I mean, basically, the border guard force is eradicating itself in that regard. So I don't really think things have gotten to a point yet where they're systematic. And you're already seeing a very strong indication coming out of the compounds that, you know, for example, there were some messages leaked from the KK Park compound this morning, just some chat amongst some of the criminal groups inside of the compound, which indicated that, oh, well, these inspections, they're just inspections. They're not really going to do anything so extreme here because the people who are doing the inspections are the general's people. Right, they're the people that are linked to the people of the border guard force. They're not going to do anything to systematically undermine the scam syndicates. And I think that that shows you, I mean, a lot of this is for show, right? I mean, you've got that many people inside. The Chinese police official who visited the area said that there were 100,000 people in Myawaddy alone. In order for him to say that and to say that in public, that must be sort of what their current understanding is of the scale of this. So, you know, if the border guard force hands over 1,000 or 2,000, that's pretty far short of the 100,000 that's now been put out there in public by Chinese police. And I think the reality is that the size of this overall, just in the broader areas along the Myanmar-Thai border, you're looking in the range of maybe 150,000 people that could be spread around all of these different compounds, you know, going from the far south of Three Pagodas Pass all the way up to Tachi Lake. I mean, you're talking about massive numbers of people that are there inside of these different compounds. So the actions that you've seen thus far are not yet systematic.